Hey guys, what's up? So today we're actually looking at another of the Duel Links videos to do with which is sorcery, and we're actually going to be looking at the common cards, or as they're referred to in the game as normal cards. They are the easiest to access and probably the ones that when you pick up a pack, depending on obviously the gems you use, those are the ones you're most frequently going to receive. The first card is Battle Wasp Halberd the Charge. This is a Wind Insect Synchro, level 6, with 2500 attack and 800 defense. It requires an Insect Tuner plus one or more non-tuner monsters, and the effect is once per battle during damage calculation. If this card attacks an opponent's monster with equal or higher attack as a quick effect, you can halve the attack of that opponent's monster during damage calculation only. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each Battle Wasp monster you control. You can only use this effect of Battle Wasp Halberd the Charge once per turn. So the first effect is actually quite decent in facing lots of the stronger decks, such as the Blue Eyes White Dragon deck. This could also work against, say, for example, Dark Magician deck. To cut their attack points in half, so you have Dark Magician go to 1250, or subsequently with the Blue Eyes White Dragon go to 1500. The downside of that, of course, is this effect can only be used once per turn. So if your opponent is able to actually bring out multiple, say, for example, Blue Eyes White Dragons onto the field, they can bait one out, or use a card such as Power of the Guardian, sacrifice some life points in the process, but actually keep their Blue Eyes White Dragon to the point where they can actually, say, get rid of the effect and then run over this card. The burn effect of this card is not very effective, considering that at most, if you have Battle Wasps on your field, at most you can have 3. That's 600 points of damage. Most likely to get this effect off, you're either going to be in a position where you're either winning the match, or more likely in a case where you might have maybe just this card on its own, in which case you might only be doing up to 200 points of damage. This is kind of how the deck works. It deals like basic amounts of battle damage, and then you've got small amounts of effect damage of 200 coming in, a little bit like how the Trickstar monsters like to interact. The next card is Altergeist Fifinillag. This is a Dark Spellcaster Tuner, level 2, with 0 attack and 1000 defense. The effect is monsters your opponent controls cannot target Altergeist monsters you control for attacks, except itself. Also, your opponent cannot target Altergeist monsters you control with card effects except itself. So basically, this card helps to redirect all attacks and effects towards itself. This is good if you've got something that you want to protect, although this is only specific to the Altergeist archetype. It's not something you can splash into, say, other decks to abuse this effect on. How effective this is, we'll have to wait and see how the meta ends up turning out as, but I don't see this being, that big of a card. So next we have Battle Wasp Pin the Bullseye. This is a Wind Insect level 1 with 200 attack and 300 defense. If you control an insect monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. During your main phase, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each Battle Wasp Pin the Bullseye you control. You can only use each effect of Battle Wasp Pin the Bullseye once per turn. So this card is attempting to kind of introduce small amounts of burn damage that can happen over time. Of course, you can use each of the you can use this effect only once per turn, so you can't stack the effects. That's the problem. If you were to have 3 on the field, you would imagine 1800 points of damage, but that's not the case. You can only get up to 600 points of damage. and it would have been much better if it had been, say for example, for every just Battle Wasp monster you have on the field. That way you wouldn't have to just rely on this card. I'm sure there are cards that interact with this, such as 1-for-1. You've got the Mystic Piper, Kinkabio. The certain cards like that can interact with this, that are specifically leveled level 1 support. But running that within these types of decks might be counterintuitive, considering that you might end up just bricking your hand. Next card is Battle Wasp Twinbow the Attacker. This is a Wind Insect level 3 with 1000 attack and 500 defense. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except insect monsters. You can only use this effect of Battle Wasp Twinbow the Attacker once per turn. This card can make a second attack during each battle phase. Okay, so the best thing about this card is it can become a special summon. It's not reliant on your opponents controlling anything. It's not reliant on whether you control anything, which are what some of the downsides are for cards such as Elemental Hero Bubble Man. I mean, you can't have anything on the field for you to special summon it. This has no restriction to it, other than, of course, you can't summon anything from the extra deck, which isn't an insect type. The second effect, which is where the Twinbow, the part of the name, comes from, is the ability to attack twice in a turn. The downside of this is, of course, it doesn't have many attack points, although you could actually stack those attack points up with cards such as Power of the Guardian. You can use quick cards if you want to. There are probably strategies that can run around this without having to splash this into a pure build of the Battle Wasps. So the next card is Speedroid Rubber Band Plane. This is a Wind Machine level 5 with 1800 attack and 0 defense. And if a monster is special summoned to your field, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except wind monsters. You can only use this effect of Speedroid Rubber Band Plane once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one face-up monster on the field. It loses 600 attack until the end of this turn. So my first thoughts of this card is, of course, normally being a level 5, that's a bit of an issue. But if you're able to kind of bring out a monster, which is what Speedroids are able to do, they kind of interact around special summoning themselves and other cards. Bringing this out isn't so much of a problem. The Speedroids only run wind attribute monsters anyway, so it's not a limit to only be able to special summon for those for the rest of the turn. I would say the main concern is that the stat loss for the 600 points is not a permanent one. It only lasts for a turn, so that's a bit of a risk. If your opponent can stall out somehow, then this effect could be a bit useless. And this only happens when it's normal or special summoned, so it's a little bit useless from that point of view as well. Speedroid Razorang is a wind machine monster with 2000 attack and 0 defense, and its effect is cannot attack the turn it is normal summoned. Once per turn, you can target one face-up monster on the field, change this card to defense position, and if you do, that target loses 800 attack until the end of this turn. So this works a little bit like that Rubber Band Plane, in that it reduces attack points. Potentially, if you have both cards in succession and use both effects, you could be reducing your opponent's monster by 1400 attack. So that even makes cards such as Blue Eyes White Dragon look a lot weaker. The downside of this card is, of course, it can't attack during the turn it's summoned. That means, of course, those 2000 attack points can't be put to good use at the time unless you've got a synchro summon using this as a material. And of course, changing this card to defense mode is a little bit like changing Goblin Elite Attack Force when it battles to defense mode. They both have 0 defense. That means even cards such as Karibo can run over this, which means you need to be able to either protect this card or you need to just understand that it's going to be a bit of a loss. So the next card is Speedroid Pachingo-Kart. This is a wind machine level 4 with 1800 attack and 1000 defense. And the effect is, once per turn, you can discard one machine-type monster, then target one monster on the field and destroy it. What I like about this card is this actually gives you two things. First, it's a decent attack monster, so just using it on its own is quite okay. The whole Speedroid archetype relies on mostly machine-type monsters. Outside of the Synchro Dragons, outside of those, they're all machines. So using the effect isn't a bad thing. You're also able to target a monster on any side of the field. So if you have a monster that's effect triggers in the graveyard, you can always do that. Or potentially against your opponent. Having that flexibility is always better for a card and actually reduces the limitations on that. I've been running a card called, I think it's Air Orca, within one of my Sea Serpent decks. I would compare it a little bit like that. The downside, of course, is that firstly you have to discard the card, and even once it gets its effect off, it gets banished until your next turn, so you're actually leaving yourself wide open, especially if you're kind of on the back foot at the time. This kind of is the all-in-one solution that you don't have any downsides to. So we have Speedroid Horse Stilts. This is a wind machine type level 4 with 1100 attack and 1100 defense. The effect is, when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one level 4 or lower Speedroid monster from your hand. During your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, send one wind monster from your deck to the graveyard. You can only use this effect of Speedroid Horse Stilts once per turn. So the summoning effect of this lets you special summon a level 4 or lower Speedroid from your hand. This can help to go into... This can be a one-card Synchro monster, essentially. You can just bring out a Tuna monster and then go into your Synchro as normal. Of course, that helps to stimulate the second effect by obviously being in the graveyard. You can actually put one of your wind monsters, which might be another Speedroid, into the graveyard, where you can recover it a lot easier than you can from trying to search it from the deck. It helps deck thin, making searching out for some of your other key cards at the time much easier as well. So we have Magistric Magician. This is a fire spellcaster level 1 with 0 attack and 2000 defense. The effect is, each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card when that spell resolves. During the end phase, you can remove 3 spell counters from this card and target one of your banished spells. Add one card with that target's name from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Magistric Magician once per turn. This card is meant to support general spell counter based archetypes, so you do have a few out there. You've got the Endymions that's out there. You've got a few other spellcaster support that rely on spell counters. Even the Skull Dark Magician, Skull White Magician, Skull Red Magician, Skull Blue Magician, cards like that which have been splashed within certain archetypes can have these spell counters to them. The effect of this card is not great because firstly your card has to have been a banished spell, and actually second you have to be running more than one of that card in your deck. Chances are you're not going to be wanting to run too many of specific cards just in case you draw into multiple within your opening hand, which also puts you into a disadvantage. I don't see this card actually being that useful unless you can find a way to break it somehow. I know spellcasters have a lot of generic support anyway, so I'm sure someone will find a way of kind of using this card. So we have Catapultopus, Familiar of the Evil Eye. This is a Dark Fiend level 3 with 600 attack and 1900 defense. And its effect is you can target one Evil Eye spell or trap card you control once until the end of the next turn. That card cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. If you control an Evil Eye monster other than itself, when this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of this card once per turn. So the main point of this card is it actually protects your Evil Eye spell or traps. Of course, using it on your turn means that your opponent isn't going to be able to use it until the end of their turn, which is quite decent, considering that the whole archetype works on the Evil Eye cards. If your opponent kind of starts getting rid of those cards, then you don't have the answers to it, and that completely disrupts your game and how the deck is meant to function. The ability to actually bring this back as well is okay, because your opponent might actually think, okay, if I get rid of this, then I can start targeting his other cards. Of course, by having this kind of secondary effect, in order to stop it from being, overused or broken, they have to have that kind of banishing effect to it. But I would suggest using cards like Imperial Iron Wall, which prevent your monster from being removed from play. I'm not sure whether that's in the game yet, but if it is, that's always a strategy to use for it. It's quite a decent card, even though it doesn't really have any power to it. The next card is Predaplant Cordyceps. It's a dark plant level 1 with 0 attack and 0 defense. The effect is, during your standby phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 2 level 4 or lower Predaplant monsters in your graveyard, special summon them. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon monsters except fusion monsters, nor normal summon or set any monsters. This card is quite a good card. It actually works really well to recover your Predaplant monsters. If it's been a longer duel, you can just bring those out. And it's not like there is one of these heroic champions. I can't remember it off by heart, but I know it's a weak monster which has the same kind of effect. In that case, it actually has to survive an entire turn being on your field, and this by turn I mean including your opponent's turn. You have to protect that card like it's your job in order for that effect to kick in during your next standby phase. This works in the graveyard, which means unless your opponent is running anything that can actually banish from the graveyard, you tend to be okay. The limitations on this do prevent you from normal summoning or setting that turn, but then again you are getting 2 monsters. They didn't want to make this too powerful. And of course you can actually still special summon into your fusion monsters, of which this deck is designed to deal with. Right, so we have Predaplant Squid Drosera. This is a dark plant level 2 with 800 attack and 400 defense. Its effect is you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, then target one face-up monster you control. This turn, it can attack all monsters your opponent controls with a predator counter once each. If this face-up card leaves the field, place 1 predator counter on each special summon monster your opponent controls, and if you do, any of those monsters that are level 2 or higher become level 1 as long as they have a predator counter. The main point of this card is it helps to, it lets you kind of overrun your opponent if you've been able to kind of set up predator counters on their cards, on their monsters. Of course, the ability to actually use its secondary effects as well to be able to generate predator counters is okay, but it depends on the match you're facing. If you're facing something like Gem Knights, Blue Eyes White Dragons, Dark Magicians, Where they are special summoning lots of monsters, then that's not an issue. If you're facing a deck that mostly normal summons, you are going to have a problem generating the second effect. It's okay support for the deck, but it's just not as useful as some of the others. So the next card is Predaplant Helium for Hincus. I don't know whether I pronounced that okay, but it's what it is. It's a dark plant level 8 with 1200 attack and 2400 defense. Its effect is if your opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by your opponent's card, you can target one dark dragon or one dark plant monster in your graveyard except itself and special summon it. You can only use each effect of Predaplant Helium for Hincus once per turn. So when I first saw this card being a level 8, I thought, okay, how is this being summoned? If you can just generate a predator counter on your opponent's monster, this could be instantly brought out either in attack mode or more likely defense mode. This says just destroyed by your opponent's card, so it doesn't specify whether that's spell or trap or by monster, so it could be by any of their effects or even through battle. You can be able to either revive one of your... the whole purpose to Dark Dragon is the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, which isn't yet in the game, so that's a little bit of an issue there, but you've got Chimera Felicia as another appropriate target, which is a dark plant, and I'm sure there's other support within this that can benefit from this effect. So we have Predaplant Moray Nepenthes. This is a dark plant level 4 with 1600 attack and 1000 defense. The effect is this card gains 200 attack for each predator counter on the field. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can equip that monster to this card. Once per turn, you can target one monster card equipped to this card by this card's effect, destroy it, and if you do, gain life points equal to its original attack. So the likelihood is your cards aren't going to have predator counters. If you can get it on all of your opponent's monsters, that makes this card 2200 attack. The ability to equip a destroyed monster means that actually they can't use it whilst it's equipped. That's a key feature of it. It's a little bit like how some people run Relinquished. By taking your opponent's monster, they can't use it for themselves to extend their plays. And of course, either if you find the card that you've equipped through this effect not that useful, or you don't just see your opponent being able to kind of abuse the card, you can of course gain the benefit of get those additional life points if you're struggling. That provides a little bit more flexibility into how the deck is currently running. Amours of Prophecy is a Earth spellcaster level 3 with 600 attack and 2000 defense. The effect is once per turn you can reveal one spellbook spell card in your hand, and you can special summon one level 4 or lower spellcaster type monster from your hand. So this helps you to just bring out general advantage, bringing out decent level spellcaster monsters if you need to, just to kind of enhance your field. It doesn't cost you that spellbook, however it does cost you a little bit of being able to kind of hide your strategy. If your opponent sees what you're running, they'll try and do things to kind of counteract that. Stoic of Prophecy is a water spellcaster level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. When this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one level 3 Prophecy monster from your deck to your hand. This is a very specific search card, and just generally how it looks like, I don't see it being that useful. I wouldn't consider even running this card. Now we're approaching the kind of lower portion of the normal monsters. Of course, These cards are just, they don't have any effects, and they're just generally pack fillers. Alan's Section is an Earth Insect level 3 with 950 attack and 700 defense. I wouldn't even pass this as a card you could use within any sort of Weevil deck. It's just not a good fit. It's just pack filler. Unlike the previous mentioned card, Cybertech Alligator does have its use as a wind machine. Level 5 monster. It has 2,500 attack and 1,600 defense. For a 1 tribute monster, this is actually very powerful, and considering monsters with similar stat lines, such as Dark Magician, are level 7, being able to actually bring this out quite easily, it's good support for normal based decks, as just as a beta. I would consider running this. Trent is a Earth Plant level 5 with 1,500 attack and 1,800 defense. This card, out of anything, is absolutely useless. It came out of Metal Raiders, one of the first packs to be introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! And you can tell because it's a level 5 with barely a stat line, decent enough for a level 3 monster these days. What the Trick is an Earth Rock level 2 with 400 attack and 400 defense. It's incredibly weak and useless. I wouldn't run this at all. So we have Wretched Ghost of the Attic. This is a Dark Fiend level 2 with 550 attack and 400 defense. To me, it just looks like a slightly stronger version of the original Karibo. It's not worth running at all. We have Black Dragon Jungle King. I believe this card is used in combination with Meteor Dragon to become Meteor Black Dragon. So this is the other fusion material for it. That's a 3,500 attack monster, by the way, and so it could be okay. But most people actually just run some kind of fusion material substitute to just deal with not having to run this card. This is an Earth Dragon level 6 with 2,100 attack and 1,800 defense. Even for a level 6, it's not that great. Jinzo can go over this. You've got other level 6s out there. Even something like Zombra the Dark, when it starts, it has 2,100 attack. For a level 4 monster, so you can even just crash into this through those means. Living Vase is an Earth Plant level 3 with 900 attack and 1,100 defense. Again, this is just pack filler, it's not a good card to use. High Speed Re-Level is a normal spell card which says banish 1 Speedrun monster from your graveyard, then target 1 Synchro monster you control. Until the end of this turn, change its level to the banished monster's level, and it gains attack equal to that monster's level times 500. So this card has kind of 2 utility points to it. Firstly, you can actually make a Synchro monster a lot stronger. If you banish, say, a higher level Speedroid monster, maybe one of your level 5s, level 6, you can have this card gaining something like up to about 3,000 attack points. Just from this effect. The secondary effect, of course, is actually you could just adjust the Synchro monster you control's level to the point where you can actually go into another Synchro monster. This can be useful if you are facing any specific circumstances where the attack boost might not be as good as, say, bringing out another monster that has an effect that works better. That makes sense. So we have some Predaplant support. This is Predaponics. It's a continuous spell card, and the effect is once per turn you can special summon 1 level 4 or lower Predaplant monster from your hand or graveyard, but it has its effects negated, even if this card leaves the field. Once per turn during your standby phase, pay 800 life points or destroy this card. This is like a continuous version of something like Premature Burial. It kind of your effects are negated, but you're able to kind of bring back your predator plants a lot easier. Of course, even with the effects negated, they can still be used for fusion, so if you can actually pair these cards well, the 800 life point damage might not be that big of a deal. The effect about paying the 800 life points is actually optional, it's not mandatory. So if you decide you no longer need this card, you can refuse to pay and just get rid of it if needs be. It's not something you're obliged to pay if you don't want to. Evil Eye Awakening is a normal spell card which says to special summon one Evil Eye monster from your hand or graveyard, or if Evil Eye of Selene is in your spell and trap zone, you can special summon one Evil Eye monster from your deck instead. You can only activate one Evil Eye Awakening per turn. The first effect enables you to gain more field advantage by actually bringing out one of the monsters from the hand or recovering from the graveyard, which can be a bit easier. But of course, the cards that are on the field sometimes treat themselves as the Evil Eye of Selene. This provides an additional effect where you can recover from the deck, providing you with a little bit more advantage. We have Chorus of Sanctuary. This is a field spell, which is to increase the defense of all defense position monsters by 500 points. Keep in mind that this is both yours and your opponent's, so if you're running a defensive deck, that's good for you, but it also helps your opponent. I would say this is quite useful for certain decks if you can kind of work on recoil damage, but otherwise I wouldn't suggest running it. So we have Evil Eye Repose. When you activate this card, it's a continuous spell card. You can banish one Evil Eye card from your graveyard and draw one card. Once per turn after damage calculation, if your Evil Eye monster equipped with Evil Eye of Selene attacked an opponent's monster, you can banish that opponent's monster. If this card is in the spell and trap zone is destroyed by a card effect, you can target up to 3 of your banished Evil Eye cards, return them to the graveyard. You can only activate one Evil Eye Repose per turn. So this card lets you actually draw a card and actually help to trigger its final effect by banishing a card. The ability to kind of banish your opponent's monsters is okay if they're very graveyard reliant. But of course, in certain decks against Metaphys, some of those removal decks, this is actually a bad thing to remove the monsters from play. And of course, being able to kind of recover cards to the graveyard means you've got more access to them rather than in the banish pile. But this provides you with that recovery. Evil Eye Reemergence is a normal spell card which says special summon one familiar of the Evil Eye token. It's a Fiend Dark level 1 with 400 attack and 400 defense. Or if Evil Eye of Selene is in your spell and trap zone, you can special summon 2 of them instead. Also, for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters except Fiend monsters. You can banish this card from your graveyard. Your opponent cannot target Evil Eye spell or traps you control with card effects this turn. You can only use each effect of Evil Eye Reemergence once per turn. So I don't actually understand what the purpose of this card is. They don't rely heavily on token generating effects, so using it is a bit unusual to say the least. Of course, they could just be used just to protect, and you can use them as tribute fodder if you need to. There's no limitations on that. It's just restricts you to special summoning. That's okay if you can run fiend types within the deck as well, outside of the archetype. The secondary effect, banishing this card, is good to protect your Evil Eye cards, which is necessary because that's the first thing that your opponent is likely to kind of target. Altergeist Telf is a continuous trap card, which says special summon this card as an effect monster. It's a spellcaster light level 4 with 1400 attack and 1800 defense. This card is also still a trap. It's summoned this way while it is in the monster zone. Other Altergeist traps you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. Also, neither player can target them with card effects. This just helps protect your other Altergeist monsters and the other traps that you might be running. It's okay as a defensive card, but it's not that powerful. The next card is Altergeist Camouflage. This is a normal trap card, which says target one Altergeist monster you control. Equip this card to it. Your opponent cannot target it for attacks, but it does not prevent your opponent from attacking you directly. Negate an opponent's monster effect that activates by targeting the equipped monster. If an Altergeist card you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. This effect is okay. It gives it a little bit like an Earthbound Immortal effect to prevent it from being attacked. But then again, it doesn't stop your opponent from attacking directly, which is a big downside to it. So unless you're you could run something like, I think it's Spirit Barrier, which if you've got a monster on your field, you take no battle damage whilst it remains there, which is just generally a good combination with this. It's also good to deal with your opponent's monster effects interactions. And of course, you can actually protect your Altergeist with this card as well. It's a very defensive-based deck, and that's just generally how this likes to run, so it's okay. Dice Roll Battle is a normal trap card, which says, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, target one Speedroid monster in your graveyard, banish both it and one Speedroid tuner monster in your hand, and if you do special summon from your extra deck one Synchro monster, whose level equals the total original levels of those two monsters. During your opponent's battle step, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one face-up attack position Synchro monster on each side of the field, make that face-up attack position monster your opponent controls, attack that monster you control, and perform a damage calculation. So the first part of this effect is meant to try and confuse your opponent or make it more difficult for them. If you've got this set down, it's obviously not going to activate until your opponent attacks with a monster. So say you only have a 1400 attack monster, for argument's sake, you can actually tune into something with over 2000 attack. I think the strongest of them is Kendama at the moment, which is 2200. So your opponent could be surprised and actually end up battling a monster that they end up losing both the monster and their life points. The second effect of it is not that great unless you're either facing Mirror Match or a Synchro-based deck. If you are, then that's okay, but it's still very situational for what it can do. The final card is Predator Planet. This is a continuous trap card, which says, if a monster with a Predator counter leaves the field, while this card is face up on the field, and one Predator card from your deck to your hand, you can only use this effect of Predator Planet once per turn. You can banish this card from your graveyard and fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials. Only Predator Plant monsters can be used as fusion materials for a fusion summon using this effect. So the point of this card is it helps to search and thin out your deck for your more vital cards, and it has a useful banish effect. By getting rid of this, you can actually fusion summon using this. It's quite decent rather than having to run generic fusion cards such as Polymerization, which might actually make your deck a lot more cloggy than it needs to be. So what do you guys think of the cards in the rares? Was there anything that actually you enjoyed? What cards out there didn't you like? Leave comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe.